Okay, so I'm going to be talking about Orchid mini displays, and there's two reasons why we have that as a topic today. And one of them is because it's an interesting topic that we haven't talked about before. And the other is, as Carl had mentioned, that we are hoping to have a few more of you create some mini displays. There's still time to do that before the show because they're pretty easy to create. And so we want to show you what's involved, right? What is a mini display, and give you some examples of ones that have been created in the past. So what is a mini display? So you all know about the exhibits, the displays, right, at our Hilo Orchid shows, right? And they're typically very large and elaborate. They're at least 10 feet by 10 feet, and some of them are bigger than that, right? With, hundreds of beautiful orchids in them. Well, a mini display is exactly what it says. It's miniature. And so it is restricted so that the width and the depth of the display can be no more than 16 inches by 16 inches. The height of the display is unlimited. So a lot of these displays tend to be taller than they are wide, right? Like the example that you can see on the screen. And although the display is miniature, the orchids in the display can be any size. So you don't have to use mini orchids in the display just because it's called a mini display. Another thing is, unlike the big exhibits at the orchid show, the individual orchids in your mini display do not have to be labeled, right? So in the big exhibits, right, how there's a tag that gets put giving the name of each orchid in the display, right, which can be useful when you see something beautiful and you want to know what it is. But in the mini displays, that would be too distracting and take up too much space. So in the mini displays, we don't put labels on the individual orchids. They just stand for themselves. And the display can contain foliage plants in addition to orchids. It shouldn't have any flowering plants that are not orchid flowers in it, but it certainly can have other foliage plants to make up the display. And an important part of the mini display is each mini display kind of has its own little theme. And so each mini display has a title. Like in the example that you can see on the screen, the title of this mini display was Orchid Expedition. And the title may or may not be related to the show theme. The particular orchid show that this mini display was shown at was called the Orchid Odyssey. And so this one did tie into the show theme by being called Orchid Expedition. But in any case, the title should reflect the design of the display itself. And as you can see here, this one called Orchid Expedition, right? There's a little tiny model of a ship that forms part of the mini display, and that ties in to the title. So we have three different categories of mini displays for this show. And the reason for having three categories gets into judging. I'll talk about that in a minute. So the three categories, the first one is the natural category or natural arrangement. So the natural display contains whole orchid plants, right? Not cut flowers. It can contain natural materials like wood or rock, but it can't have man-made materials. So for example, glass or ceramic or wire or plastic. Now, you can create mini displays with any material that you want, but if it has man-made materials, then those are category B, not category A, the natural arrangement. So what is category B? So that's called artificial or cut flower arrangements. And I remember talking to Leslie Hayes Collins. Leslie's in charge of the mini displays at the show. Leslie was going to give this presentation, but unfortunately she couldn't be here today. And I remember talking to her several years ago saying, saying it's an artificial, display, that doesn't sound very good. But then, the question was, so what should we call it? So we have natural displays. So should we call these unnatural displays? And Leslie didn't like that term very much either. So we're still going to call them artificial. But what it really means is that they're unrestricted in terms of what you can put in the display. So the display can contain whole plants, but it can also contain cut flowers, which the category A natural displays don't have cut flowers. And the artificial display, it can contain natural materials too, but it can also contain man-made materials, glass, ceramic, wire, plastic, or whatever, right? So perhaps a better term, instead of calling them artificial, might be to call them unrestricted. Now, they still have the one restriction as to the size, right? So they're still mini, which means that they still are restricted to 16 inches by 16 inches in terms of the footprint. And then our last category is the youth category, and that is displays that are created by people 16 or under, created by kids. In the past, we've actually gone to some schools and youth organizations to try to get kids to participate in the mini displays. And those can be either natural or artificial cut flower. So again, no restrictions on what they can have in them other than the 16 by 16 size. So as I said a minute ago, the reason for the three categories gets into judging. And the judging of these mini displays is based on judging the overall design, right? We're not judging individual flowers, and that's part of the reason why you don't have to label the individual flowers, right? It's the whole design, the whole effect. And a good design may only have a few orchids in it. So this is a point that I want to emphasize. So if any of you are thinking of creating a mini display, you don't have to have a lot of orchids in it, right? Just 2 or 3 or 4 orchids may be just fine for creating a mini display, because again, it's the whole effect, the whole design that counts. And the type of judging that we're talking about here is ribbon judging, right? This is not AOS judging, American Orchid Society. Ribbon judging is done at the show by volunteers like you and me. It's not done by the official judges. So it's people who sign up for ribbon judging and are given different things to judge. Some of the ribbon judges will be looking at all the cattleyas in the show, and some of them will be looking at all the vandas in the show. Well, some of the ribbon judges will be looking at the mini displays. For each category of those 3 categories that I talked about, the ribbon judges will give out 1st, 2nd, and 3rd place ribbons. We like to give out ribbons to people who put up displays in our show because it encourages people to participate. And then in addition to the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd place ribbons for the 3 categories, we also have a trophy that gets awarded to the overall best of the best, right? So the overall best of the 3 categories of mini displays gets a trophy or a plaque. And in this example that you see on the screen, this particular mini display, and I think this one was made by Shelby Smith, it won the blue ribbon in its category, and it also got the trophy or the plaque for the best mini display in the show that year. So the suggested judging criteria for people to judge these displays, right, are to judge each mini display based on the design, based on harmony, right, how harmonious is the design, based on the theme, right, so does the mini display live up to its theme, based on originality, right, of the design, and then finally the quality of the flowers. So the flowers are actually not the biggest part of the judging here, which gets back to my previous point that you can create a great mini display with only a few orchids. Now, those are the suggested judging criteria. Now, since again, the ribbon judging is done by volunteers like you and me, the actual judging criteria turns out to be it's whatever the volunteers like the best. And so it ends up being the people's choice, right, among those volunteers who are judging the mini displays. Okay, so let me give you some examples of some mini displays that have been shown in the past. I should mention, because Carl mentioned that I had taken a lot of photos of mini displays at previous shows, which is true, but actually all of these photos in my presentation today were taken by Dana Culleney. And I had taken a lot of photos as well, but Dana's photos came out better. And so, so I thank Dana for all of these photos. Dana's not here today. She's in Washington State. She went there for a birthday celebration for her mother, and I think her mother is 98 years old. So we wish Dana well. And again, I thank her for these photos that I'm using today. So my first example of a natural display here was, it had the title Driftwood Odyssey. It was done by Carol Hanby. And, you know, just look at this, how simple and elegant this design is, right? It's a piece of driftwood and it looks like there's just 2 orchids in there, right? And yet it forms such a beautiful display that it got one of the ribbon awards at that show. So again, proof that you don't need a lot of orchids to create a mini display. What you need is some imagination and maybe some artistic talent. So here's another natural display, and this one was called Rock Steady, right? Created by Karen Kimmerly, right? And so you see it's a natural display based around a rock, and there's some moss around the rock, right? And then a few orchids, right, arranged around the rock as well. And it just creates a beautiful natural composition. Here's one called Kona no Kaoi by Charlotte Bryant, and I am assuming, I don't know Charlotte, I'm assuming that she must live in Kona from the name of that display. But this display is based on a very sculptural piece of wood. I mean, look at that beautiful piece of wood with its branches and so forth, right? And then again, just a few orchids to set it off, and it makes a really effective composition. This one, Orchid Rainforest, right, by Victoria, is a natural display, right? And it used a monstera plant. Remember, I had said you can use foliage plants in the display. So this one uses that plant very effectively, right, for to echo the title of the display, Rainforest, right? And then it's interspersed with some beautiful orchids, right, that make it, again, a really effective composition. Okay, let me give you some examples of artificial or cut flower arrangements, which again are basically the ones that have something other than all natural ingredients. So this one, if you're thinking that oh, you know, you couldn't make anything very impressive with just cut flowers, well, have a look at this display. This one was done with cut flowers. You can see, right, that they're sitting in that vase at the bottom, right? And then the display also has this arrangement of what looks like it was created out of picture frames, maybe painted white in an almost abstract design, right? And then with these orchid blooms that are so you know, abundant in the display. It really makes an impressive sight. This one, as you can see, was called The Big Bang by Donna Barr. And again, I think a very effective design. Right. So again, trying to make the point that use your imagination, right? So your design can be whatever you want it to be. Here's another display that I just love, Serenity, that was done by Vivian, and it's a miniature garden. And the plants in the miniature garden are miniature orchids, right? So, you know, how neat is that? And it's not just any garden, it's a Zen garden, right? So you can see the miniature Zen sand garden in here. So a very beautiful display. And again, only a few orchids were needed to create it. This one, The Odyssey of Koi by Dorothea. So again, this must have been for our show where the show theme was Orchid Odyssey. This one has a little ship in a bottle, if you can see near the bottom of the display. But then it also has a decorative plate with some koi on it, and then some beautiful orchids on the sides, and you know, all together making a really pleasing arrangement. This one, Happily Lost in the Jungle, right, by Julie Getch, is a display that's basically created right around a Japanese lantern, Japanese stone lantern. Then a variety of orchids, most of them being either purple or yellow. And so again, very appealing combination and very beautiful display. This one, Reflections by Linda Moore, I believe this one was created for our orchid show where the theme was Kaleidoscope of Orchids. And so this display is rather clever because it uses mirrors to suggest the kaleidoscope. But in this case, the mirrors are reflecting the orchids. And again, there's only a few orchids in the display, but because the mirrors reflect them, it looks like there's more orchids there than there actually are. So a very cleverly done display. This one, Geckos Love Orchids by Dorothy, so again, just a few orchids and natural materials inside, but I believe this was considered artificial display because it was inside of this glass, this little glass container. The sign next to it says, how many geckos can you find? And when I looked at the photo here, I can see at least one gecko in there. So, and based on her question, how many geckos can you find? My guess is that there's probably more than one. So this one not only had orchids and foliage plants, but it had orchids and foliage plants and geckos that made up the display. So again, a great use of imagination. This one, Limua Kamoku by Ruth. So you see, Ruth, one of your, I see you waving, one of your displays did actually make it into my presentation. And so this one, so it has the natural ingredients, right? So some rock, some moss. I think the reason why it wasn't considered a natural display is because the stand that's holding up a part of those rocks is made out of wire, right? And so wire was considered man-made, but it still presents with the rocks and the moss and then the orchids. And if I'm not mistaken, there's water in the base of that display too, which I don't think anybody else thought to use. So again, very imaginative and creating a very beautiful composition. And you can see that this display also it won a blue ribbon in its category, and it also won the plaque for Best Miniature Display that year. And then finally, some examples of our youth category. And so here's one called Orchid Island that was created by Ryan, age 7, right? And what a nice looking display that is, right? Again, a few orchids and a few other foliage plants, right? And a beautiful little display, right? This one, Fiber Forest by Joseph, age 5, right? And again, a few orchids, and he did a great job. Notice how he used some ferns on the base to kind of cover up the base and of the display and the pots, right? So that you don't see those. So it ends up looking really nice. And so my comment here is, if a 5-year-old can create a mini display, then you can create a mini display. It is not that hard, right? It's something that anybody can do. And then our final youth display that I want to show you is called Sacred Garden by Ainsley Smith, Shelby's daughter. This one also ended up winning the blue ribbon in its category. And I think Ainsley must get her artistic talent from both sides of the family. Again, very well done. And if someone like Ainsley can do it, then you should be able to do one too. So in conclusion, I just want to say that you can create a mini display, right? We're looking for a few more people to create some mini displays for our show that's coming up at the end of this month, right? All you need is a few orchids and your imagination, and there is still time to sign up. And what we're going to do is I'm going to send out an email probably tomorrow that'll have all the details on how to sign up, because I believe there's a registration form for registering for what they call an amateur display. And I need to update that form to put the appropriate deadline on it, because I have the form left over from a few years ago. But I will update that form, and I'm going to send it out to everyone by email. We're going to ask people if you would like to create a mini display to please send an email to Leslie, who's going to be in charge of the mini displays. And again, in the email that I send out, I'll have all the details of who to send it to. But to send an email so that within the next week, so that we know how many mini displays we're going to have at the show. And the reason we need to know that, right, is that Rick Kelly is in charge of putting together the floor plan for our show. And he needs to know how many tables we're going to have in the floor plan to put mini displays on, so that when we actually start setting up the show, right, we can set up the right number of tables, and we have everything set up. We have everything planned in advance. So we're going to give you a couple of weeks to actually fill out the paperwork to be signed in, but we are going to ask you if you'd like to do a mini display to get back to us fairly soon, like within the next week. That's basically it for my presentation. So let me stop sharing and let me ask if there are any questions. And Carl, if there's questions from the audience, you might have to repeat them so that I can hear them.
Okay. Any questions from the audience? Oh, come on. One that I was thinking of is for the mini displays. Ideally, you would bring your mini displays on Wednesday, anytime on Wednesday. You could bring them in on Tuesday if you want, and they'll be there overnight, but they don't actually get judged till Thursday. So if you can, ideally, you want to bring your mini displays as fresh as possible late on Wednesday. So they'll be fresh on Thursday. And the other thing we do is, if you have one of these displays, you're welcome to come and spritz the displays to keep them fresh during the show. So I know there's a couple people that have mini displays, and I see them go off to the side, pick up a little spray bottle and spray their display to keep them fresh and stuff. So you do have that opportunity. Yes. Yes, you have free reign on that. I mean,
We'll print it out for you. So you send us your title and we'll print it out for you. So
okay,
all of them will have the same format and everything. Because we have to have two labels for every display. One will just have the title and one will have the title with your name on it. And during judging on Thursday, we turn the label so it only shows the title without your name. And then during the show, we rotate it so that your name is on it.
okay. Let's see, any other questions? Yes.
So in the past, we've had the theme of the show. But this year, it's Ohana, but we do anything.
Yeah, so it's Orchid Ohana, which is like Orchid family. So, and there is kind of a second part to that theme, which we haven't used that much because we didn't put it on the t-shirt, but it's blending beauty and aloha. Is kind of the,
It doesn't have to be.
no, it doesn't have to be with that theme. So you have free reign to design a display and label it how you wish. So, guess what else? There's something else. So I guess, I don't know, I just heard that presentation and I've never done a mini display, but I think I'm gonna go and put one in this year. So, so I don't know if anybody else, you can raise your hand and join me, but I think I can do a mini display and I'm gonna probably tap my wife on the shoulder. Hey, I'm kind of busy. Can you help me a little bit here? It's now Tuesday night. I gotta get this in on Wednesday. But yeah. So, but I'm sure I can put one together.
And Carl, let me also just remind people, so about the timing, right, for bringing your display to the show, as you mentioned, you can bring it Tuesday or Wednesday, but it needs to be there before judging happens Thursday morning. So it needs to be there by the end of Wednesday, basically. And then the other thing is that the show closes at 2 o'clock on Sunday. So that's when everybody takes their stuff home again, right? And that would include your mini display, right? That when the show closes at 2 o'clock on Sunday, right, then you can take your mini display away.
Yeah, that's the other thing. You got to pick up your display by 4 o'clock on Sunday.
2 o'clock.
Well, so 2 o'clock when it's up, but by 4 o'clock we want the floor empty so we can clean.
But they have to go at 2 because we're holding up tables. So it's got to go at 2.
So,
And just an aside, I would say subjectively, over the last 5 years since we've been doing this, the mini displays are the highlight of the show. If you're just wandering around the floor, there's the biggest crowd and the most conversation going on around the mini displays. The big displays are nice, but the mini displays get the most attention.
Yeah, Rick is right. People really love those mini displays. And so that's why we're hoping to have a few more of you sign up to create some mini displays, because we only have a few people that have signed up so far. Now, I know, we got a late start on the show this year, right? And so everything is kind of being done a little later than it normally would. But there is still time to do this, right? The show isn't until the end of this month. And again, mini display is not that big. It doesn't have to have that many orchids in it. And so it's something that if you're thinking about doing it, it's something that you can do.
one more question? So there was a question if there's a limit of entrance.
10, you can't do more than 10. No more than 10 per person.
No, but there is no limit on the number of, so we'll take as many as we can get. And like, the reason that being is because they do get a lot of interest and attention at the show. So people very much appreciate having those mini displays, so. Yeah, we've had people put in, I've seen 2. I don't know if I've seen many more than 2, a person submit more than 2, but I've seen people submit more than 1. Submit 2, so. With that, thank you very much, Larry. Oh, well, let me check. Is there anybody on Zoom with a question? We've been doing a lot of questions from here, but I'm not seeing the screen.
Yeah,
Right.
Tom,
I would just like to make one remark, and that is we're preparing for what I think is going to be a very spectacular Gila Orchid Society exhibit. And as much as I want us to have everyone participate and use their creativity to make exhibits, and mini exhibits are a great way to start off and you know, to, like, as has been said several times already, they're very impressive. People love to be able to get up close and personal to them. But as one of the co-creators of our main exhibit, I really want to encourage you to not use all of your orchids in a mini display. Contribute to the main show, which is going to be really great, but only if we get participation from all of you. So yeah, do a mini display, but definitely contribute orchids to the main Hilo exhibit. You'll be very proud, I promise.
yeah, and let me echo my Tom's sentiments there. So yes, we're certainly looking for more mini displays, but again, a mini display only needs a few orchids, right, to make a beautiful display. But we also are desperately need people to bring in orchids for our Gila Orchid Society display. And again, this is a loan. You'll get the orchids back again, right? But we're asking for you to loan us your orchids, and right, even if it's only one or two, right? So if everyone does this, then we'll end up with a spectacular display. But we have a larger than usual display this year. It's a huge display. And so we really need people to bring in orchids. So basically, anything that you have in bloom, right, if the flowers are in decent condition, and as long as, you know, the plants don't have bugs on them, right, or, you know, scale or whatever, then yes, please bring in those orchids so that we can show them off as part of our HOS display.
That is something that really is important, because I mean, in terms of making sure your plants don't have critters in them, it's like if you had COVID and you came to a show and infected a bunch of people. You really don't want to do that. So do your absolute best. I mean, things slip through the cracks sometimes, but do your best to treat your plants, make sure that they don't have any bugs in them, or God forbid, fire ants or anything like that. It's only courteous to everyone else that's participating. So you know, we're depending on you to be responsible citizens, and we really are depending on you to make this exhibit its absolute best.
All right, one more question. Oh,
Can we also bring those displays?
excuse me. Okay, so this is, I think you're talking about the HOS display orchids. Okay, so let me close out this discussion. We'll get to that discussion. So yeah, okay, the same. Okay, so I want to thank Larry for a wonderful presentation, and hopefully getting us inspired to do some mini displays. And he should be reappearing in about 15 minutes from his home just north of Hilo. So you can thank him in person when he comes back.